Hoyoverse gave me early access again, and this time we're going to talk about the first 5-star support and healer of Natlan that might actually change current top teams and even buff very old characters. Today we're taking an early look at Xilonen, and we have a lot to talk about. To simplify everything, I divided this video into 3 sections. In section 1 you will get to understand why and where she is strong. Plus, since Xilonen is going to be called very often quote-unquote Geo Kazuha, I want to explain one fundamental difference that might go underlooked. Section 2 will talk about a different way you can play her, and finally, in the last section, since she is not out yet, I aim to prepare you to build her, with a focus on her signature weapon. But first, disclaimer. This video was filmed on the Creator Experience server with permission from Hoyoverse. Any content shown might be subject to slight changes. Xilonen is a Geo 5-star sword user, mostly scaling off defense. She has 2 possible playstyles, support and on-field damage dealer. Spoiler alert, the latter has a few issues, but we will see it later. Her skill makes her enter the Night Soul Blessing state, like basically every Natlan character so far. She will get to do Geo-infused damage, move and climb faster, but most importantly, she will show off these 3 gems called samples. These are a representation of your team. Having party members that are Pyro, Hydro, Cryo or Electro, which are simply the elements Geo can react with, will tune these gems into the respective element. Party members that are Geo, Anemo or Dendro instead will default to a Geo sample. So if I put 1 Anemo unit and 2 Pyro units in my team, I will end up having 1 Geo sample, which is taken from the Anemo unit, and 2 Pyro samples. Even if I have a combination like this, it simply works accordingly. But why are these important? Well, that's the way you can decide your playstyle. If there are at least 2 conversions, so 2 or more of any combination of Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cryo, she enters what we will call a support stance. Now attacking replenishes Night Soul points, and reaching the max will end her Night Soul Blessing and give you probably the most important part of her kit, a resistance reduction of the elements of her samples to any nearby enemy for 15 seconds. So in the Sutao Vape team, once the samples are activated, every enemy nearby has reduced Pyro and Hydro resistance. This reduction equals to 36% at talent level 10, which is very comparable to one of the strongest support sets in the game, the Iridescent Veneerer. Activating it is actually quite simple. One of her Ascension talents will make it so that normal and plunge attacks during the skill regenerates 35 Night Soul points each. You get 45 at the start, and when you get to the maximum of 90, you activate the rest reduction. So let's make it extremely simple. Press skill and attack twice. That's it. You are now decreasing the resistance to every single element in her samples. She needs no stats, no energy, no long on-field time. She gets this buff in the most simple way possible. And here is where a direct comparison to a certain Anemo unit starts. Because she's from Natlan and she can use the Scrolls set, which offers damage percentage to Geo and any element involved in her crystallized reactions. A Xilonen with Scrolls buffs by a very similar amount as a Kazuha would. So she's just a Geo Kazuha. Or is she? They actually have some important differences. Xilonen's Burst is a simple AoE that scales off defense, but in the support state it's also a continuous heal to any character that is on field. I tried this heal with Favonius Sword and 2 defense main stat, which you can see on the left, and her signature on a full defense plus healing bonus circlet on the right. Although the healing is single target, it's quite high. And this could play really well to a lot of teams and especially to Furina. Xilonen also offers no grouping and basically no damage, because let's not forget that Kazuha, especially under the right circumstances, actually does quite a bit of damage. They also don't exactly provide the same bonuses. Kazuha's damage percentage depends on his elemental mastery, and VV is slightly more Resh Red than a crowned Xilonen skill. But the Resh Red is pretty much always better than damage percentage, and that's the part that Xilonen gets no matter what. And this is very important. And something I feel people might get wrong. Yes, she is similar in terms of buffs, but the delivery is different and could be a total game changer. There are many teams that struggle to slot in Kazuha, not because he can't work, but because he's tied to swirling the elements he wants to buff. No swirl equals no buffs. None of them. Xilonen is not exactly like that. No crystallites means no scrolls set. but a Red Shred is pretty much always active. I can just go up against a Hydra Tulpa and decrease its pyro resistance by simply using her kit. A Nemo cannot do the same without resorting to specific tags. This is such a big quality of life upgrade for either particular teams or players that don't want to bother with complicated setups. Most probably won't care, but have you ever played Kazuha in a Ganyu or Wriothesley team? There are some setups, but they are complicated, easy to mess up, or straight up not even that great. Taking Wriothesley as an example, there is no way to have good uptime on Kazuha's buffs without trading Bennett's uptime or simply have it last for just a few attacks. Xilonen can have a much easier time. Her buffs also last longer. VV is 10 seconds, her Red Shred is 15 seconds. Kazuha's damage buff is 8 seconds, Scrolls is 20. Of course you can refresh them, but that's not something that always ties up well with your rotation, especially if you are on field for long periods of time. And of course, setups will still matter for her, especially because you ideally have to crystallize each element you want to buff for the scroll set to work. And that can arguably be harder than some swirl setup, but at least part of the buffs are there regardless. And there are a lot of winners out of Xilonen's release. Novilette is probably getting his best team ever, because why play one Kazuha when you can play two? And one of them is also a healer to further increase Furina's fanfare stacks. And let's also not forget that she doesn't stop at crystallizable elements, she also buffs Geo if present. Navi and Ningguang, heck even Itto, might get new teams. Of course, how strong these various teams are going to be will highly depend on what you have and play. I just want to clarify that I'm not saying she's better or worse than Kazuha, Xianyun or other buffers in the game. All I'm saying is that she's worth looking into and will likely be a great side grade. Sometimes similar, sometimes better, or maybe worse. And finally, there is one last part of this support stance that I didn't mention. If you max out your Night Soul points, which is basically always happening, she triggers a Night Soul burst, which is actually quite the buff for Moalani and probably future Natlan units. Moalani's burst is able to stack them and get damage off of it. The Night Soul burst of Xilonen is also a separate instance that doesn't trigger the usual cooldown, so you can get 2 in a row really quickly. This would be pretty good for Kinich as well, but unfortunately he gets nothing out of Xilonen in his teams. She can only buff Geo and elements Geo can react with. But let's move on from all this meta talk. It probably will need an entire video on its own anyway. Earlier I said that one of her playstyle is as an on-field damage dealer. And I'm sorry to inform you that her multipliers are a bit underwhelming and won't compare to the usual experience of a 5-star damage dealer, especially nowadays. Xilonen is first a support and then anything else, but I still wanted to test it because I'm sure a lot of you out there might be interested. So to activate this damage stance, you need to form a party with one or no Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cryo units. How many between Geo, Danger and Anemo is up to you. This playstyle stops her from getting Night Soul points so that she can deal Geo damage for longer and does 2 more things. Increases normal and plunge damage by 30% and makes her burst deal its damage 2 more times, also in AoE. The burst can actually hit pretty high, but we're losing her healing and a portion of the Red Shred she provides. The Geo Red Shred is always given to you during her skill, but no other element is being debuffed. Her damage ends up in the a bit underwhelming but not unusable category. With good investment, you can clear Abyss with it, but you would probably have an easier time with another damage dealer and her as a support. Of course, this is all from C0, although her damage only increases with really high investment. On release, I will definitely give this playstyle a try, and I would advise anyone wanting to try the same to use teammates like Goro, especially at C6, Furina, Kachina for the scrolled sets so that Xilonen can use a more offensive set like Obsidian or Husk, or I think Xianyun could actually be pretty strong as well. On to the last section, we need to talk about her signature weapon, Peak Patrol Song. This weapon is the first defense substat 5-star weapon and gets to a whopping 82.7% of defense substat. The effect will boost the user's defense even further and damage percentage bonus when normal or plunging attacks hit the opponent, with 2 stacks. But the real effect comes now. Once you get to the stacks, or you refresh them, the entire team gets damage percentage based on the user's total defense. 1000 defense equals to 8% damage, Maximum at R1 is 25.6, which requires 3200 defense. With this weapon, you need roughly 2 main stats to reach this breakpoint, so your build will have to change accordingly. This is a great weapon, but it's comparable to something we already have, Freedom Sworn. The buffs are slightly different, but it can be as easy to trigger by delaying your first normal by a second or simply using your burst. Is there any other option? You might think of using one of the defense swords already in the game, but those will basically only contribute to her healing, which is only necessary with Furina. And even there, I'd rather burst off cooldown every rotation. Her damage being not that great as a support makes you probably want to slap in a Favonius. I think beyond these two support 5-star weapons, Favonius is probably the next best thing. Xilonen will default to the scroll set, so the only thing we need to take a look at is what stats to go for. Energy recharge, defense percentage, and crit rate with Fav sound all great. It's possible to min-max her healing with a circlet on healing bonus, or also just ignore it, since it's going to be pretty high regardless. We could then try to use geo damage and crit value. However, we're getting very little damage out of it. In a way, she's very similar to Bennett in terms of builds. A personal note on Xilonen is that I found the initial Natlan casts incredibly fun to explore with. They blend perfectly with the region and are fun and engaging. I seriously hope Hoyo continues this trend. Xilonen is nothing less when used to explore the Natlan map. She's basically a stronger Kachina in that regard, and honestly, for climbing, she's even great outside of Natlan. Stay tuned for a more focused video on a lot of topics treated here today. I'm not sure how to structure a video for my 7 advanced tips series for Xilonen, but I already found some pretty interesting combos, and the need for her to activate her set actually has a skill ceiling comparable to some Kazuha setups. I also just want to push C0 DPS Xilonen to its maximum potential. I'm really enjoying being able to showcase characters before they release, and that's thanks to you guys for watching. Hope to see you in the next video as well.